Chicago, November 1970. A Friday night so cold, the breath of 10,000 people fogged the air inside Chicago Stadium, a building with concrete walls 4 feet thick, steel beams running across a ceiling so high the cigarette smoke never quite reached it, and wooden seats worn smooth by 30 years of nervous hands gripping armrests during fights that ended badly. The building smelled like every fight it had ever hosted: sweat and canvas and old leather and something darker underneath, something that seeped up from the floorboards when the temperature dropped. 10,000 people filled every seat. They came from the stockyards and the steel mills and the truck depots along the lake. They came in work boots and cheap suits and wool coats that smelled like the cold outside. They brought cash because this was a cash business, and they brought opinions because this was Chicago, and nobody in Chicago came anywhere without opinions. This was Friday night boxing. No television cameras, no celebrity rows, no sponsored banners hanging from the rafters, just the fight, the crowd, and whatever happened between the opening bell and the last man standing. Outside, the wind off Lake Michigan moved through the empty streets with the particular persistence of Chicago winter wind, the kind that finds every gap in your clothing and reminds you that this city was built by people who refused to leave, despite every reasonable argument for doing so. Chicago Stadium had been standing since 1929. It had hosted championships, political conventions, concerts, circuses. It had seen everything, or so its walls believed. Tonight would quietly revise that belief. Nobody would write about it officially. Nobody would announce it. But the building would know. Buildings like this always know. The main event tonight was Tommy the Wall Kowalski versus Eddie Reyes. Kowalski was the headliner, 6 feet 4 inches, 260 pounds of Polish-American muscle built in the gyms of Southside Chicago over 22 years of professional boxing. His record was 34 wins, 2 losses, 29 knockouts. His nickname was not accidental. Men hit Tommy Kowalski and felt like they had hit a wall. Then the wall hit back. Reyes never made it past the 3rd round. 3 weeks before that Friday night, a phone call was made from a downtown Chicago office to a hotel in San Francisco. The man making the call was Victor Malone, the man who ran Friday night boxing at Chicago Stadium the way some men ran small countries, with absolute authority and very little paperwork. Malone had heard about Bruce Lee the way everyone in the entertainment world had heard about Bruce Lee by 1970. Through whispers, through stories that seemed too extraordinary to be completely true, but too specific to be completely false. He wasn't interested in martial arts or philosophy. Victor Malone was interested in one thing: a good show. The invitation was simple. Come to Chicago. Watch the fight from ringside. Be available afterward for a brief demonstration. Good money. Bruce Lee accepted. He arrived in Chicago on Thursday afternoon, alone. No entourage, no assistant, no publicist. A single leather bag over his shoulder and a dark suit that looked like it had been chosen by someone who understood that the right clothing in the wrong room could be its own kind of armor. He spent Thursday evening walking the streets. Not sightseeing, walking the way certain people walk when they are reading a place, absorbing it, understanding what kind of city this was, and what kind of people filled it, and what kind of night Friday was going to be. Chicago told him everything he needed to know. It was a city that respected one thing above all others: not money, not reputation, not connections, results. What you could actually do when the moment arrived and everything was on the line. Bruce Lee understood cities like this. He had grown up in one. Friday night, 8 o'clock, Chicago Stadium. Bruce Lee sat in the fourth row from ringside. Center position. The seat Victor Malone had arranged. Around him sat Malone's associates, local promoters, a sports writer from the Tribune who was there to cover Kowalski and had no idea he was sitting 3 seats from the most dangerous man in the building. The preliminary bouts ran from 8 to 10. 4 fights, 3 stoppages, 1 decision that the crowd disagreed with loudly and at length. The energy in the building built the way energy builds in places where large numbers of people have gathered specifically to witness controlled violence. It became its own living thing, moving through the seats, getting louder, getting hotter, despite the November cold seeping through the concrete walls. Bruce Lee watched every fight with the same expression. Still, focused. The expression of someone cataloging information rather than seeking entertainment. The man sitting next to him, one of Malone's associates named Frank, tried twice to make conversation. Both times he received polite, brief responses and then silence. Frank gave up and focused on his beer. At 10:15, Tommy Kowalski entered. The roar that went through 10,000 people was physical. You felt it in your chest before you heard it with your ears. Kowalski walked down the aisle with the particular gait of a man who had been the largest, most dangerous person in every room he had entered for the past 20 years. Unhurried, inevitable, like weather moving in from the lake. He wore a white robe with Kowalski stitched across the back in red letters. His hands were already wrapped, his face already set into the expression he wore for fights, not angry, not excited, just present in the specific way of someone whose entire being had been organized around a single purpose. Bruce Lee watched him enter. He watched him climb through the ropes. He watched him acknowledge the crowd with the ease of a man completely at home in his own legend. And he noted, with the quiet precision of someone who catalogs everything, exactly how Kowalski moved, how he carried his weight, where his confidence lived in his body, what it would cost him. The fight lasted 3 rounds and 40 seconds. Kowalski was not cruel about it. He was simply efficient in a way that left no room for hope. First round, he established distance and took measurements with his jab, 4 precise shots that told him everything he needed to know about Reyes. Second round, he began the dismantling, body shots that made Reyes's outlegs question their commitment. A right hand in the final 30 seconds that would have ended things if Reyes hadn't grabbed the ropes with the desperation of a man clinging to a cliff edge. Third round, 40 seconds. A left hook that arrived from an angle Reyes never saw. The sound it made was heard in the 14th row. Reyes went down and didn't get up on his own. 10,000 people made enough noise to rattle the steel beams in the ceiling. Kowalski raised both fists. He turned slowly in the ring, acknowledging every section of the crowd the way a king acknowledges territory. His cornermen rushed in. His trainer embraced him. The referee lifted his arm. Then Victor Malone climbed through the ropes with a microphone. What happened next was not planned. Malone's plan had been simple. Brief introduction. Kowalski says a few words. Crowd cheers. Then the martial arts demonstration. 30 minutes. Bruce Lee. A clean exit. Everyone goes home satisfied. But Kowalski was not a man who followed other people's plans. Never had been. It was, in some ways, the source of both his greatness and every problem he had ever caused. He took the microphone from Malone, and he looked at 10,000 people, and he began to talk. At first, it was what everyone expected. Gratitude. Acknowledgement of the crowd, of Chicago, of the years of support. Standard champion speech. The crowd responded warmly. This was their man. South Side, Chicago's own. Then something shifted. "I want to say something," Kowalski said, and his voice through the arena speakers had the particular quality of a man who has decided to say the thing he actually thinks, rather than the thing that was prepared for him. "I've been hearing a lot lately about these martial arts, about kung fu, about these Eastern fighting systems that everybody's talking about. I've watched the demonstrations, I've seen the movies, I've read the articles." Kowalski paused. His eyes moved across the crowd slowly. "And I want to say something that nobody else seems willing to say. It's garbage, kung fu, karate, all of it. Beautiful to watch, impressive in a movie theater, absolutely useless against a real fighter. I am the best fighter on this planet. I have fought 36 men. 34 of them could not answer the bell at some point. And not one of these so-called martial arts masters has ever stepped forward to test themselves against real boxing, against real power, against what I do." He lifted the championship belt above his head. "Because they know, deep down, behind all the philosophy and the robes and the bowing and the ceremonies, they know. A real fighter would end them in seconds. And they cannot admit that because their whole world is built on the idea that what they do is real." He lowered the belt. His voice dropped, which somehow made it louder. "I'm standing in this ring right now. I'm not going anywhere. If there is one person, one single person, in this building who thinks kung fu or any other martial art can compete with what I do, come up here. Get in this ring. I will give you the first shot. I will stand completely still and let you hit me with whatever you've got. Is there anyone here? Anyone at all? Or does everyone in this building already know the answer?" He spread his arms wide. Silence. 10,000 people and silence. The sports writer from the Tribune stopped writing. His pen was hovering above the page, but his hand had forgotten what it was supposed to be doing. Somewhere in the upper tiers, a child asked his father a question. The father didn't answer. Nobody answered anything. The building held its breath. In the fourth row, Bruce Lee had not moved. He had listened to every word with the same expression he had worn through all 4 preliminary bouts. Still, focused, cataloging. But something had changed behind his eyes. The people who knew Bruce Lee, the small number of people who had trained with him long enough and paid close enough attention, they would have recognized what was happening. It was not anger. Anger was too simple and too loud for what was moving through Bruce Lee in that moment. It was something quieter and more absolute. The thing that happened when a line was crossed that could not be uncrossed. When words were spoken that created an obligation that could not be avoided. Kowalski had not insulted Bruce Lee personally. He didn't know Bruce Lee was in the building. He had insulted something larger, something that Bruce Lee had given his entire life to, something that was not, in any sense of the word, garbage. Frank, sitting next to Bruce, felt the change before he understood it. He turned. He saw Bruce Lee beginning to rise from his seat with the slow, deliberate movement of a man who has made a decision and is now simply executing it. "Hey," Frank said. "Hey, what are you—" Bruce Lee was already standing. His voice without a microphone should not have carried to the ring. The physics of it argued against it. 10,000 people, a building built for noise, 30 feet of distance between the fourth row and the ropes. But the silence was so complete that it carried anyway. "I will fight you." 3 words that landed in the silence like stones dropped into still water, each one creating its own ripple outward through 10,000 people, who heard them and understood immediately, on some level below conscious thought, that the night had just changed direction completely. Tommy Kowalski turned toward the voice. For a moment, he simply looked, processing what he was seeing. A man in a suit, small, standing in the fourth row with one hand raised like a student answering a question in a classroom. Kowalski's face moved through several expressions quickly. Surprise, amusement, something approaching disbelief. You? His voice through the microphone filled the building. You want to fight me? Yes. One word. Quiet. Absolute. Kowalski laughed, not the performance laugh of a showman working a crowd. A genuine laugh, the kind that escapes before you decide to let it out. Son, do you have any idea what you're doing? Yes. The crowd was making noise now, but it was a different kind of noise, not the roar of excitement. Something more confused, more uncertain. The sound of 10,000 people trying to understand what they were watching. Victor Malone, still in the ring, was having a quiet emergency. He moved toward Kowalski with the intention of taking back the microphone and redirecting the evening toward something manageable. Kowalski waved him off without looking at him. Come up here then, Kowalski said. If you want to fight, come up here. Bruce Lee moved toward the ring. The crowd parted, not because they were making room, because something in the way he moved created space around him involuntarily. He walked the 30 feet from his seat to the ring apron with the same unhurried deliberateness he had used to walk the streets of Chicago the night before. He climbed the ring steps. He ducked through the ropes. He stood in the center of the ring in his dark suit, and he looked at Tommy Kowalski, and 10,000 people looked at both of them, and nobody made a sound. The size difference was almost abstract. Kowalski, at 6'4" and 260, looked like a different category of human being standing next to Bruce Lee at 5'7" and 140 pounds. It looked like a misunderstanding. Kowalski studied him. His expression had moved past amusement into something more professional. He was a fighter. Whatever else he was a fighter. And fighters have instincts that operate below the level of conscious thought. Some instinct was telling him something that he was choosing, for the moment, to ignore. Take off your jacket, Kowalski said. Bruce Lee removed his suit jacket, folded it once, handed it to Victor Malone, who accepted it with the expression of a man holding an object at the scene of an accident. Underneath was a simple white dress shirt. Bruce Lee began unbuttoning it from the top, slowly, without drama, his eyes never leaving Kowalski. When he removed the shirt, the crowd made a sound. What stood in front of Tommy Kowalski was not what 10,000 people had expected to see. The body was not large. It was not imposing in any conventional sense, but it was so precisely constructed, so completely without waste, that it created its own kind of presence. Every muscle visible, every line defined. A body that had been built for one specific purpose over many years, and showed it. Kowalski looked at him for a long moment. His trainer was shouting something from the corner. Kowalski wasn't listening. He was looking at Bruce Lee, the way experienced fighters look at opponents they are trying to read, searching for the tell, the weakness, the thing that would make this make sense. He found nothing that reassured him. He chose to proceed anyway. If you can beat me, Kowalski said, I will apologize to every martial artist in the world, publicly, and I will call you the greatest fighter alive. Bruce Lee said nothing. And when I put you down, Kowalski continued, you go home and you never claim to be a fighter again. Deal? Deal, Bruce Lee said. The referee stepped between them. He looked at Bruce Lee. You understand what you're agreeing to? Yes. He looked at Kowalski. Kowalski shrugged. Give him whatever rules he wants. It won't matter. The referee stepped back. 10,000 people leaned forward simultaneously. The sports writer from the Tribune had his pen ready. He would later write that in 20 years of covering combat sports, he had never felt what he felt in that moment. The particular quality of silence that arrives when something genuinely unprecedented is about to happen, and every person in the room knows it. Kowalski came out the way he always came out. Measured. Professional. Jab extended to establish range. Weight properly distributed. Chin tucked behind his left shoulder. 22 years of muscle memory executing itself without conscious direction. He threw the first jab as a rangefinder, not intended to land. Intended to gather information. It gathered none. Bruce Lee was no longer in the position the jab was aimed at. He had moved, not backward, not to the side, forward and slightly left, inside the arc of the punch, close enough that Kowalski's forearm brushed his shoulder as it extended past him. In the space created by that movement, in the fraction of a second while Kowalski's weight was committed to a punch that had found nothing, Bruce Lee's right hand moved. What happened next would be described differently by everyone who witnessed it. The sports writer from the Tribune would write that he did not see the punch. He saw Kowalski throw his jab. He saw Kowalski's expression change. He saw Kowalski's legs stop working. He did not see what happened between those three things. The sound was sharp, clean. The sound of force arriving at a destination with complete efficiency and zero waste. Kowalski's head snapped back. His legs, which had held him upright through 36 professional fights and 22 years of training, sent a message to his brain that they were no longer able to perform their function. His knees buckled. He went down. Not the fall of a man who has been pushed. Not the controlled descent of a man choosing to go to the canvas. The fall of a man whose central nervous system has received information it cannot immediately process, and has decided, in the interest of survival, to bring the body closer to the ground while it works out what has just occurred. Tommy Kowalski hit the canvas of Chicago Stadium on a Friday night in November 1970. The referee stood over him and began counting. He reached 8 before Kowalski's eyes fully focused. He reached 10 before Kowalski found his feet. It was over. The silence lasted 4 seconds. 4 seconds in which 10,000 people tried to reconcile what they had just seen with what they had believed to be true about fighting, about size, about power. Then the noise arrived. Not the roar of a crowd that had seen what it expected to see. Something rawer than that. Something that didn't know whether to cheer or argue or simply stand in place and process. Kowalski was on his feet. His corner men were in the ring. His trainer had his face in both hands. Kowalski was listening, but his eyes were on Bruce Lee. Bruce Lee stood where he had been standing when he threw the punch. He had not moved. His right hand had returned to his side. His breathing was unchanged. His expression had not changed. He looked at Kowalski the way a teacher looks at a student who has just learned something difficult. Not with triumph, not with contempt, with something closer to recognition. Victor Malone appeared at Bruce Lee's elbow with his shirt and jacket. Bruce Lee put them on without hurry, buttoned the shirt, put on the jacket, straightened the collar. He turned toward the ropes. "Wait!" Kowalski's voice. Quiet. Now, no microphone. Bruce Lee stopped. Kowalski walked to the center of the ring and stood in front of Bruce Lee and looked at him for a long time without speaking. When he spoke, his voice was smaller, more honest. "How?" he said. Bruce Lee considered the question. "You fought the man you expected," he said. "I fought the man who was standing in front of me." Kowalski absorbed this. "I said Kung Fu was garbage," he said. "I know. I was wrong." "Yes. A pause. "Come find me tomorrow," Bruce Lee said. "We'll talk." He turned, ducked through the ropes, and walked up the aisle through 10,000 people who had come to watch Tommy Kowalski and had seen something else entirely. He reached the exit. He pushed through the door. Chicago received him, cold and dark and indifferent, the wind off the lake cutting through his suit jacket as if it weren't there. He walked into it without breaking stride. Tommy Kowalski held a press conference the following Monday. He kept his word. In front of 12 journalists and 2 television cameras, he stated publicly that he had been wrong about martial arts, that he owed an apology to every martial artist he had insulted, that he had been knocked down by a man he had underestimated in every possible way. He never fought professionally again. Not because of injury, because he had spent 22 years believing he understood fighting. One punch had ended that belief, and that, he told his trainer privately, was not something you could rebuild on the same foundation. You had to start over, from the beginning, with honesty. Victor Malone never spoke publicly about that Friday night. The sports writer from the Tribune filed a report that his editor refused to run without documentation that could not be provided. The story existed in whispers, in the locker rooms of Southside Chicago gyms, in the conversations of people who had been in the building and could not fully explain what they had seen. Frank, the man who had sat next to Bruce Lee all evening and grabbed his arm and said, "Hey," and been ignored, told the story at his son's wedding in 1974. His son asked him what it felt like to be sitting next to Bruce Lee when it happened. Frank thought about it for a long time before answering. He said it felt like sitting next to a man who had already decided everything while everyone else was still trying to figure out what the question was. Eddie Reyes, the man Kowalski had knocked out in the main event, was in the locker room when the noise from the arena changed. He heard it through the concrete walls. That second roar. The confused one. The one that didn't know what it was. He asked his trainer what happened. His trainer didn't know. Nobody in the locker room knew. They found out later, the way everyone who wasn't in the building found out. Through someone who was Kowalski's trainer, a man named Sal Benedetti, who had been in boxing for 30 years and had trained 2 world champions before Kowalski, quit the sport 6 months after that night. Not because of what happened to Kowalski, because of what he saw in Bruce Lee's eyes in the moment before the punch landed. He had seen that look before, once, in a different sport, in a different country, in a man who understood something about combat that most people never reach. He had spent 30 years looking for it in fighters and never finding it. Seeing it in a man who wasn't even a boxer, who had walked in off the street in a suit jacket, who had thrown one punch and walked away without looking back. That was the thing Sal Benedetti could not fit into any framework he possessed. So he quit. He went home to his wife in Bridgeport, and he told her he was done. She asked him why. He said he had finally seen the best there was, and it had nothing to do with boxing. 10,000 people witnessed it. None of them ever forgot it. And in a hotel room on the north side of Chicago, Bruce Lee packed his leather bag, checked out before dawn, and took the first flight back to San Francisco. He never mentioned Chicago in any interview. He never claimed credit for what happened in that ring. Some lessons, he believed, belong to the person who learns them, not to the person who teaches them.